Today, we're going to look at section 5.3, word problems with rational numbers. If we look at number 1, a chocolate chip cookie recipe for 5 dozen cookies requires 2/3 cups of brown sugar. If you want to make 7 dozen cookies, how many cups of brown sugar will you need? So we can use the formula our textbook gives us for this. It tells us that the amount of the ingredient needed equals the desired serving size divided by the recipe serving size times the ingredient amount in the recipe. So if I look back at this problem, they tell me that a chocolate chip cookie recipe, so the next information they're going to give me all deals with the recipe, for 5 dozen cookies. So that's my recipe serving size. So that's my 5 dozen. Requires 2/3 cups of brown sugar. So this is still from my recipe, but that 2/3 cups of brown sugar is that ingredient amount in the recipe. So I'll have the 2/3 there. It says if you want to make 7 dozen cookies, so that's what we want to make, that's our desired serving size. How many cups of brown sugar will you need? So we don't know that amount of ingredient needed. So because both of these, the 7 dozen and 5 dozen, both have that dozen after it, I can just write it as 7/5. And then I can say times that 2/3. Now remember, you have your calculator. So I'm going to type this in as 7 divided by 3, because remember a fraction bar and a division sign mean the same thing, times 2 divided by 3. And that gives me this messy decimal number, but I don't want that decimal. I want to turn it into a fraction. So I'm going to hit math and then choose that first option to change it to a fraction. And that's going to tell me that I have 14/15. Now I always need to include units in my final answer. So they were asking how many cups of brown sugar will you need. So I'll say 14/15 cups of brown sugar. Let's look at the next question. It says a board that is 7 1/4 inches long is cut from a board that is 3 feet long. If the width of the saw cut is 1/16 of an inch, what is the length of the remaining piece? So if I'm trying to figure out what's going on here, I have one big board and then I'm cutting it up into pieces. So if I look at this, they're telling me that I have a board that's 7 1/4 inches long is cut from a board that's 3 feet long. So they're telling me that this 3 feet long is that original board because it's what I'm cutting a piece from. So I'm going to draw a board to help me visualize what's going on here. And I'm going to say that this whole thing is 3 feet long. Okay. Then they tell me that I cut a board that's 7 1/4 inches long. So I'm going to cut a piece off, and this piece is 7 1/4 inches long. Then they also tell me that the width of the saw cut is 1/16 of an inch. So they're telling me this piece is 1/16 of an inch, right? If you've ever used a saw, that width of that saw blade is what turns into your sawdust. So it's not on either part of the board, but it does disappear. And then they're asking us what is the length of the remaining piece. So we want to know this length. Now the first issue that I notice is that we have different units going on, right? We have inches, and feet. So the first thing that I'm going to do is convert those feet into inches. So you may already know that in 1 foot, there's 12 inches. So we're going to talk a little bit more about dimensional analysis in sections 9.1 through 9.3. But essentially what I'm going to do here is take that 3 feet and put it over 1, And I'm going to take this conversion, this 1 foot equals 12 inches, and turn it into a fraction. And when I use that fraction, I want the same units to be diagonal from each other. So I'm going to put the feet down here and the inches up here. So I'll know that 1 foot is 12 inches. When I multiply straight across, the feet cancel out. I'm left with 36 over 1, or just 36 inches. Now for this problem, because we haven't learned about that dimensional analysis yet, if you just saw 3 feet and said, hey, if I multiply it by 12, that's going to give me my 36 inches, that's okay too. So instead of this 3 feet, I'm going to think about this 36 inches. Okay, now the next thing that I'm going to do, my second step, is that I'm going to figure out how much is missing, or how much do we cut off. So to do that, I'm going to take the 7 1/4 inch piece that we're losing, and I'm going to add that 1/16 inch piece that we're losing from that saw. So now you can definitely use your calculator to do that. Your scientific calculator is going to have buttons to actually use those mixed numbers and type them in. So I'm going to practice this by hand just to kind of show you guys what's going on. So I need a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply by 4 over 4. That's going to give me 7 4/16. And I'm going to add that 1/16. That tells me that I have 7 5/16 inches are what's cut off. So now the last thing that I'm going to do is try to figure out how much is left, right? What that question's asking me. So to do that, I'm going to do that whole board and I'm going to subtract out what we cut off. So that means I'm going to take this 36 inches and I'm going to subtract out the 7 5/16 inches. Now once again, you can type this right in your calculator and it'll likely be a lot faster. But I want to kind of refresh your memories on how we do this by hand. So what I'm going to have to do is borrow, because my 36 inches doesn't have a fraction piece. So I'm going to borrow 1 whole from that 36 and make it a 35. And that 1 whole, I'm going to turn it into a fraction. So if you think about when we're borrowing 1, which was what we're doing here, we can think of 1 as a fraction, that 1 over 1. And think about what we did up in the second step, right? I multiplied that 1/4 by 4 over 4 to get this common denominator of 16. When I add and subtract, I want a common denominator. My denominator down here is 16 again. So what I'm going to do is multiply by 16 over 16. And that's going to tell me that when I'm borrowing 1 as a fraction, I'm borrowing 16/16. So I'm really going to write it as 35 16/16. Then I'm going to subtract out that 7 5/16. And when I do that, I'm going to get 28 11/16 inches. And that's my final answer. Let's look at another example. It says a will states that 4/5 of the estate is to be divided among relatives. Of the remaining estate, 1/4 goes to charity. What fraction of the estate goes to charity? So if I'm trying to picture what's going on again, I'm going to call this entire thing the estate. Right, that's all of it, the 1 whole. Then they're telling me that 4/5 of that estate is to be divided among relatives. So if I'm thinking about breaking this up into 5 pieces, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then they're telling me that this much, 4/5 of it, goes to relatives. So that means that this leftover piece is 1/5. So that's what's left over. So that's what they're talking about when they say the remaining estate. They're saying of that, 1/4 of it goes to charity. So essentially what they're telling us, if we're picturing this, is they're saying break this up into 4 more pieces, and then this little piece is what's going to charity. So if we're trying to figure this out algebraically, we can use our keywords. We know this word of means to multiply. So what we're going to do is take that 1/5 of that remaining estate, and we're going to multiply it by the quarter that goes to charity. And that's going to tell us that 1/20th of the estate goes to charity.